everyone. I'm Zach Pentel, head of brand strategy at Spotify, based over here in New York. Last year, I was lucky enough to be in person for On Brand. Hopefully the same will be true next year, but for now, I suppose remote will just have to do. Today, I'd like to talk to you a bit about what we've been up to for the last 9 months at Spotify, some of the changes we've observed in people's behavior, some of the ways that we've responded as a brand, and some other large cultural shifts that I think might be applicable outside of just our business and perhaps into yours. So specifically, I'd like to talk about listening in this new attention economy. A lot of changes that have taken place over the last 9 months or so we believe will carry forward into the future, but likewise are pretty important for us to be observing and responding to right now. Quickly, before I get into that, just talk a bit about my team at Spotify and what we represent, why we exist, what we do every day. We're a bit different from your traditional brand department within a larger brand organization in that we have two sides to the work that we do. The first is brand management, fairly traditional, not unlike the way that you would have a brand management organization built in to a larger marketing team at any brand. We oversee the consistency of the brand. We help push the brand forward. We make creative decisions based on how different markets around the world are interpreting the brand. We also oversee a lot of cultural research that makes sure that we're staying on the forefront of our audience's expectations of us as an audio company, both in music and podcasts. So that's sort of more traditionally brand marketing led. The other half of the work that we do is creative. We are the in-house creative department at Spotify, and we function as an integrated agency, essentially, from creative direction to creative development, design, production, and strategy, which is the team that I oversee on a daily basis. So between those two sides of our business, we're responsible for pushing the brand forward thematically and also executing on it, which means that we've, for a long time, had sort of one particular big job within the company itself, and that is to intersect with culture, to find places where music and podcasts and streaming and audio culture all intersect with one another, to find new ways to push audio culture forward as well. Finding ways to make our mark in a way that makes as big an impact as possible, because frankly, a lot of our competitors have really, really big budgets. And if we're gonna go out there and make our mark on a global scale within a type of culture that is moving so quickly forward, we need to work smarter and not harder. That's always been the way that we've operated. That's still true, but of course there are some changes today now that culture operates perhaps at a different speed and in a lot of different media than it used to. Our other old job was to expand the world of our listeners, the 300 million plus people who open Spotify on a regular basis. We're supposed to help people discover new things about themselves, about their communities, things they didn't know before, encouraging people to branch out, encouraging them to listen to the world around them, pop their cultural bubbles, surprise them whenever we can. Those were all of the types of behaviors and interactions that we expected to have with our audiences. And that's what they've come to expect from us as well, whether that's a playlist like Discover Weekly that puts 40 new tracks in front of them that they've never heard before every single week, or it's something just like surfacing a new band that they've never heard of in a more organic fashion. Those were our old jobs, but of course, and we won't belabor this because I'm sure you've heard it from every presenter so far at On Brand, but everything stopped, everything changed. And like every other brand, we decided to, from the comfort of our own homes and over Zoom all of a sudden, figure out if those were our old jobs, what is our new job? What is our new job as a brand marketing team to ensure that we are meeting our listeners halfway, that we are responding to their needs, that we are bringing as much empathy as possible to that interaction, and likewise that we're serving them in a time when they're probably going to be turning to brands like us more than ever as they're seeking comfort, escape, whatever it might be. So in other words, how do we create new value in this new attention economy and ensure that we're meeting our audiences halfway? This is where, if we're talking about that split in our team of brand and creative, this is where we sit squarely on the brand side. What is the role of our brand in the music, or in audio culture today? Looking at this in sort of, March, April 2020, give or take. How do we create new value in that new economy? So the first thing we did was we decided to take a look at how culture was changing. And in order to do so, we do that through simply putting our ear to the ground and understanding how people are listening and how the data that we're getting out of our own platform can start to inform perhaps some larger shifts in the way that people are actually acting outside of just their listening habits. So for example, this is a picture, I think, from Boston.com, but it's a picture of Shanghai right after the shutdown occurred. You see here, every person who used to pass on this road every minute during rush hour has had every one of their routines and their rituals disrupted. They don't get in their car in the morning and go through the same, 20-minute drive into work. They don't get on the same bus. They're not going through a lot of those same things that can become so regular. You build other behaviors around them. Behaviors like listening to a podcast first thing in the morning, or turning on your favorite playlist when you go for a run before you're getting ready for work. All of those routines go away. And as a result, natural moments become quite unnatural. These routines need to form themselves again. And in the interim, of course, people don't listen like they used to. So we realized that there was such this massive disruption in life was also being represented in all the data that we were seeing come through in Spotify. People's listening habits changed dramatically and almost overnight. For example, fewer linear moments like commuting, of course, fewer moments of sort of predictive long periods of time when you need to occupy yourself with something in your ears to keep yourself it's entertained essentially. But we were seeing more moments of people choosing the types of audio that would show that they're trying to stay connected to those around them or to themselves. And I'll get into that in just a minute as far as what types of exact content that is. But in any case, a major shift in what we do leads to a major shift in how we listen, and also informs a lot in terms of what we can pull out of that probably tells us what people are doing when they're not listening as well. So we've been talking to listeners over the course of this whole period, as you can imagine, in various forms, whether it's sort of structured surveys or just sort of more ethnographic methods. But one thing that we wanted to understand early on, the United States shut down in just about middle of March. So back in April, we talked to listeners and asked, are you listening more or less than you have before? And 67% of people said that they were listening more than they had before things shut down. Now, of course, when you disrupt everyone's routines and rituals, like I mentioned, for brief periods of time, you kind of stop listening, or at least the listening that you're doing becomes much more intentional because you don't have any sort of patterns to fall back on. But we found that it didn't take people very long to build new routines and to fill that with audio as well in the form of podcasts, music. And that even came in the form of the way that people were listening in the car. I was using that analogy before. You take away people's commutes and all of a sudden everything changes. But all of a sudden, people are listening in the car even more. In fact, it's not just up, it's accelerating. In-car listening has increased 40% since April, which we find quite remarkable. And there are probably a lot of different ways that you can guess that that came to light, or reasons, I should say, that people are listening more in their cars than ever before. And probably all of them have a token of reality to them. Not the least of which, there's been a 121% increase in listening to Spotify road trip playlists by our free users. They're listening 121% more to these moments that we have built into the app. So that starts to tell us a lot about perhaps why there's more listening happening in the car. People are taking more road trips than they have. They've gone away from other forms of transportation and toward these. Likewise, people are increasing listening in other types of moments. Gaming playlists are up 41% since the beginning of April as well. And the late evening used to dominate, call it 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. And then the 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. slot used to be the most popular times for gamers to be listening to gaming playlists and late at night, which, makes sense. But in the last few months, we've also seen huge increases in gamers who are streaming music in the early morning, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., 9 a.m. to noon. First, we thought, yeah, this is probably likely due to a decrease in commuting. People suddenly have more time on their hands if they're stuck at home, and they're filling those hours with moments of gaming and also listening on top of that. Of course, there's also less accountability at home. So, some people are just very, very good at multitasking, I think. I've redacted this guy's last name and handle as not to get him in trouble with his employer. But perhaps that's why we're seeing some midday gaming playlist increases as well. People are taking just a little bit of a quiet break from work and playing Call of Duty. But we also learned a lot about people's moods based on the kind of music that they listen to. That's one of the most interesting things for us as creatives to start to take a look at, is what types of music indicate what moods people are expressing in any of these moments. So in March, right around the sort of initial weeks of the shutdown, we found the chill playlists started to dominate, especially in the United States. Playlists like lo-fi beats, perhaps things that were distracting or calming people down. By April, we started to see an uptick in down-tempo playlists like rainy day music. Versus in June, we started to see a huge uptick in up-tempo playlists like beach vibes. So you can almost track loosely the collective emotional state of our 300 million users over that time period. And of course, not everyone attaches themselves to these patterns, but these kinds of patterns exist, and they're remarkable enough for us to take notice at a macro level. They also help us understand how to respond to and to serve our audience. Understanding their emotional state on a larger scale can help us make sure that we're meeting them with the right tonality when we want to as a brand. And just as importantly as the type of music that they're listening to, we also wanted to understand whether they were listening on their own or together. And as it turns out, 47% of people said that they've listened in a group setting in the past 2 weeks. We assume at home. 40% of those listeners say they're listening at home more often than they did prior to social distancing. All of that makes sense, but when you start to see such massive numbers attached to it, we realize that there is more collective listening happening than before, largely because we're inhabiting the same spaces as those who are close to us, greater hours of the day than ever before. So it makes sense that you would cut that up with listening as well. And of course, that presents an opportunity for us to find ways to reach them with content and with brand moments that are quite actually relevant and, like I said, can increase the level of value as we start to understand where their attention is and where it comes from. So they're listening together. They're listening now to things that are a bit more upbeat than they were at the beginning of quarantine. But ultimately, we've been here learning how culture and behavior are changing. That's step one. Step two is to find our place in it. So to do that, we go back to some of the core elements of our brand to try and connect where we've been to where we're going. And we look at some of our instincts. And some of our instincts in these moments were as follows. That one, we felt like it was not a time to pull, or was a time to pull, but not a time to push. In other words, let's create experiences that people love and encourage them to come over to us when they feel that they want to, as opposed to trying to push them into new experiences. This isn't a time for us to try and pop their cultural bubbles in ways that can be disruptive. No one has the capacity for that. So we're not going to try and do that. We're going to create more of a pull than a push when it comes to our branding strategy. Secondly, one thing that we've known forever is that music is a mirror on culture and behavior, and now more than ever, that seemed to be the case. From tracking the type of music that they were listening to in March and April, to looking at the ways that they're listening in the car or when they're sitting at home doing things like gaming, music is a mirror on the way that people behave, and we needed to ensure that we were leaning into that as a cultural truth when we created moments for the brand itself. And thirdly, as we always do, one of the first questions we ask ourselves as marketers is, where can we find the common ground between us and our audience, but also between our audience and each other? What's the common denominator of everyone who's on our platform and those who are listening through a time like this? So the one interesting opportunity that was afforded through this global moment was that for once in at least as long as I can remember in the world of branding, effectively everyone we were trying to reach across the globe was going through a common experience. And of course, that common experience is represented radically differently based on the country that you're in, your socioeconomic status, obviously whether you've been affected directly by the pandemic or not. But nonetheless, everybody was able to sort of latch onto this singular moment. And one interesting thing that we found, and we had this insight sitting around before, but I think this was the first time we realized that it was something we should leverage. So we looked at behavior on the platform and we said, okay, if that's true, that everyone is experiencing this single moment, what brings us together as people? And one thing that's true is that 30,000 times every second, people start listening to the same song as someone that they've never met. 30,000 times every second, two people click the play button on the same song in other places in the world, anywhere across our user base. So we thought this was a terrific opportunity for us to try and build just a little bit of a moment that showed that level of connection that we all have together. We called the platform Listening Together. And it's still available. You can still find it online, but you essentially click and drive in, and it at any given moment shows you this is the case. An upbeat one today, Dynamite by BTS, someone in the Philippines, and someone over in, where is it? In Granada, in Spain. People in those two locations click play on that song at the same time. And so we visualize that on a globe, and you can click and drag around and see hundreds of these moments. We don't pull in all 30,000 every second. That would be a bit much, but you can see sort of the sense of just collective musical community that we have, even in a time when we all feel quite isolated and separated from each other. So we thought that was a nice moment and that this was the right moment for us to bring it forward. We put it up on billboards around the world in the same sort of a way. In this case, showing that, Mac Miller fans in Mexico City and Marrakesh were listening at the same time as well. So listening together and just the ethos behind this particular campaign turned into the foundation of how we felt we should as a brand be appearing in other parts of our business as well. And this is the type of understanding and empathy and cultural truth that we wanted to push forward. So in finding our place in it, we also decided to bring it to life across a number of different ways that we communicate as a brand. And I'll go through just 3 or 4 here so that you can see what I mean. The first piece here is we met listeners at home. And I know that, probably goes without saying that there would be an obvious way for us to tap into the fact that everybody sort of wound up behind their front door for a good while, but it was also a good time for us to remind ourselves that our brand is greater than just marketing. And we don't think of brand as just a function of marketing. We think it is something that can drive connection and continuity across the entire business. So our brand gives us a number of things and that we use it for. One of them is it brings us clarity. It's an area of focus. It's a simple proposition that aligns all of us to each other at Spotify. It's a litmus test that every employee and every agency that we work with can align to. It's an easy way to make sure that our decisions are all coming from the same place. It helps us make business decisions. Understanding that focusing on that idea of listening together should be a centralizing point that helps us decide what to prioritize and what to deprioritize as a business. That helps ensure that we're creating a consistent experience for our listeners, that people who see our communications off platform are greeted with something that feels consistent when they come on platform. And on a good day, we think that makes people happy. We think people like to see our brand. Our brand and our fans are generally happy to see one another when they encounter each other in the world or on platform. And so that helps us understand the role of the brand, not just in our marketing, but also across everything we do on platform. And finally, in terms of thinking about our brand as something that lives outside of just marketing channels, of course, we respond when we need to with larger changes that can help us meet our audiences in ways that are consistent with their expectations. And when I say that we met them at home, that's exactly what I mean. We created a hub on Spotify called Spotify at Home. We have hubs for commuting, for working, for exploring, for partying. We'd never created one specifically for at home, especially when a lot of those things I just described now occur in one particular location. So we thought it was a simple but impactful way to meet our listeners literally where they were. And it was a product and content decision, but ultimately had huge implications for the brand. And when we met with our product and content teams about this, we thought this is the absolute perfect way for us to make sure that we're demonstrating through our actions the type of brand that we're trying to create off the platform as well. So you can see under these categories of listening here, we created a whole category called Listening Together to map to that off-platform campaign, showing how a number of artists and individuals were listening at home as a way of creating connection. Work from home playlists, cooking playlists, workout playlists, things that may be a little bit obvious, but to put them all in one place allows our listeners to feel like, oh, we're actually responding to their new realities. So we met listeners at home. Our second tactic here was to bring the distractions, and we're good at that. We are good at making things. I think our creative team have been very always just shocked and awed by the kinds of things that they can come up with that you wouldn't ever be able to write into a brief, but just occur naturally. And in one case, one of our creative directors, who is a big animal lover, decided, well, wouldn't it be pretty interesting if we were to create playlists for people's animals? Why not? People go to the end of the world for their animals. Why wouldn't we try and create some music for them as well? Something that owners and pets can enjoy together, something you can put on for your pet when you leave the house, whatever it might be. So we thought that sounds hilarious and fantastic. And actually one of our engineers who works on the playlist algorithms got so into it that he started to do some research on animal psychology. And so as we go through this, you click on your pet, you on a slider here can decide how relaxed or energetic your pet is. And then, this is true across all of the different pets that we picked here. Birds, cats, lizards, hamsters, dogs. And then it creates a playlist for you that is theoretically attached to the interests of your animal. So it's not exactly rooted in hard science, but there's some correlation there. So we just created playlists for people and their animals, which we felt would just be something that was bring a bit of joy. And it worked pretty well. People absolutely love them. People were playing these playlists for their animals. Some people saying that it's actually better than their Discover Weekly, which is kind of funny. But people have just responded in kind. We made these little share cards you could put up on social. So this is just a selection of how people actually responded to it. We did a bit of an out-of-home campaign for it as well to make sure people knew about it. Spotify.com/pets, and we did a film campaign for it as well. And here I'll just show you one of these quick videos. If you a bad chick, let me hear you say, little booty, big booty. And in case you're wondering, yes, that was all shot in one shot in camera. We had that guy running on the treadmill for quite some time while we waited for the hamster to feel like it wanted to start running in the wheel. And we were able to capture it in that one single shot. So that was a fun one, but also, you know, it's set at home, obviously, things that feel familiar today. So that was just a point of distraction that we thought would be fun for our listeners. Third, we responded to the collective mood. We always try to do this. In this case, it was a matter of maybe going back to our roots more than it was trying to find something that was completely brand new. We know that as a brand, we're often driven by discovery and trying to encourage people to listen to the world around them. Like I said, expanding their horizons, helping them branch out. That didn't feel exactly like the right thing to do in this more emotionally fraught time. We didn't want to push people, we just wanted to pull them in. So people were looking for familiarity and consistency, but not necessarily looking for an adventure in audio. And for those, we reintroduced our time capsule playlist, which we originally launched, I think 3 or 4 years ago now. We call it the playlist that got you before you got you. And using our algorithms, we basically go back and based on your current tastes, extrapolate what you were likely listening to 5, 10, even 15 years ago. It's kind of spooky how well it works. Mine managed to identify a couple of bands that I don't think I've listened to since high school. It's a dose of nostalgia that's quite welcome, brings back a ton of memories, of course. And we felt that the collective mood of our audiences, especially as we were looking at the types of music they were listening to, suggested, let's hit them with a dose of nostalgia rather than a dose of brand new discovery, and let's see how that works. And you know, it's been a really successful relaunch of that time capsule playlist as well. People traveling back in time a little bit and reliving moments from the past. So we respond to the collective mood. We also focused on the moment. And in the US, just over the past month or so, that's meant focusing on the upcoming election and doing our part to make sure that we're helping get out the vote. We know that artists are vocal on the issues that matter to them. We know that Spotify has a role to play as a platform to help amplify their voices, the things that they believe matter. So we partnered with a few folks to find our role in this moment of culture and politics. Now, we're not a political organization. Our idea here was simply to try and increase the amount of awareness around the election itself and help people figure out how to vote. So we want to encourage people to check their voting eligibility, to learn how to vote, to figure out where they should be voting in their locales in an attempt to try and boost the voting percentages, especially among younger demographics, which over-index on Spotify. So for example, here's one piece that we shot with Young M.A.
Hello. What up, y'all? This is Young M.A. and I'm here to remind you that you may be eligible to vote by mail in this upcoming election. I love mail. Look, I even got a little custom drip right here. I feel gangsta. I feel like a delivery woman. Young M.A.I.L. Go vote. Go vote. Go vote. Return your ballot and play your part, man.
Love that one. Likewise, on platform, we partnered with a bunch of artists like Khalid to have interstitials pop up when you're listening to their music that were sort of related to the song that you were listening to as a way of reminding you about certain things related to the election. So when you're listening to location, it would pop up and say, did you say polling location? It's election day, time to check out where you can vote, then send your friends their locations too. So that's one that'll pop up on election day itself. Or we did one with the Marvelettes. Please, Mr. Postman, but actually, don't forget you can vote by mail and thank your local postal workers for getting your votes in. There's a dozen of these, but we got into it with artists like Cyndi Lauper as well, and time after time. So this is our way of creating these sort of relevant beats that don't feel like we're trying to push people into a behavior so much as respond to what's going on in culture and of course in politics and the impending election here as well, making sure that we can make an impact on things like this without overwhelming the user or stepping outside of the bounds of what's appropriate or expected of us, frankly, as a brand that centers on listening. So of all of those different tactics, of course, that were focused around pet playlists, responding to listeners, making sure that they had the music they wanted at every moment. Of course, we said a little bit about ourselves as well. We launched a new product at the beginning of the year here called Duo, which is this particular package within Spotify Premium that gives you 2 accounts for just over the price of one, and it's targeted at couples. So we thought, as we were going into this creative brief, what insight could we use that would be a very interesting way of approaching the way that couples listen to music. And we found through just sort of focus groups that we conducted that couples always have different tastes in music and strong opinions about each other's preferences. We know that. So we set out to document these couples talking to each other essentially about their music tastes. But given the realities of production, we couldn't send camera crews out to people's houses in the middle of quarantine. That would have been irresponsible and wouldn't have resulted in the outcome that we wanted from a production standpoint. So we couldn't actually go into anyone's homes. So what do? Well, we recorded the voices of these real couples in conversation about music, and then we built them into puppets. And we animated those puppets to the conversations. So here's an example of one of those spots.
Nice, right? Yeah. No, okay. Action. Taste in music. So I have better taste in music because I'm a classical musician.
I without a doubt have better taste in music because I can spot a good song when I hear it.
I think my taste is maybe a little more eclectic than Steve's.
I completely disagree with you.
We listen to music when we're together.
I listen to hip hop, romantic music, hard rock, baby.
Kevin,
Real talk.
You don't like all that music.
Yes, I do.
Who listens to Christmas music in the middle of summer?
Your boyfriend does. Your music, it's like A to the B to the C to the E, F, G.
And you think your opera is better?
Yes.
No, it's not.
I'm not going to argue forever.
Yes, you are.
Can we take a selfie?
Yeah, let's take a selfie.
Yeah.
So that's our campaign for Duo, which I was just love the way that our production team took a limitation we experienced and how we could make communications like this and actually turned it into what I think is a really eloquent opportunity to document these users in a way that just feels so human, even though they're puppets. Well, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. It's great to be able to share a bunch of this work. I hope it's relevant to the work that you're doing as well. And at this point, I think we've saved a little bit of time to do questions.
Fantastic, Zach. Thank you very much. The puppets being human actually was a fantastic thing to watch. Thanks. Well, you're live in Amsterdam. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, thank you. I'm going to jump right into the questions then. I like the thing you said about music being a mirror, of course, to people and to the zeitgeist. Where are people right now in Europe? I mean, in America, we're starting to vote. In Europe and America, a new wave of corona. Have you seen are people optimistic or pessimistic according to the music?
I haven't seen the stats on Europe specifically. In fact, I haven't really looked at anything, geographically specific over the last maybe month or 2 months, honestly. What we've been observing more than anything else is that people are returning back to a lot of their normal habits when it comes to the way that they listen. And that's substantiated by the data, of course. I think it's also probably quite predictable in the sense that, as I mentioned, in my presentation as well around routines and rituals, we're all finding new ones now. And that's just reflected in the way that people are listening to across the globe. It will be interesting to see, for better or for worse, how listening adjusts as we experience more global waves of the pandemic, of course, and as just like geopolitically things tend to shift. This upcoming election in the States will no doubt result in some change in the way that people listen on a macro scale. So we'll be keeping our ears to the ground for that.
Okay, I hope so. Spotify relies obviously a lot on personal consumer data. And are you wondering if there is a potential backlash from more privacy-focused consumers to that?
We haven't, thankfully that's a question above my pay grade. We've got a team that's quite dedicated to managing the way that our data is not only managed on platform, but also the way that we, are shared out. But, one thing that I'll say about, for example, our end of year wrapped campaign that we do, where we give users sort of a view into the way that they listened over the course of the year through some interesting infographics and charts around how much they listened, what they listened to, what time of the day they listened, all of those kinds of things, which genres they found that they listened to the most over the course of the year. Is we have a tendency to just show people what they've been listening to themselves, and then give them the power to share it if they want to. So it's not something that we feel like is ours to pump out into the world. It's something that we let users take control of.
Okay. Are there any working habits that you plan to continue with beyond the pandemic?
No, that's a great question. Fewer screen hours I think would be nice, but As I mentioned at the beginning, working in a creative department, we are a multinational company. We are very used to communicating with each other over screens like this. I mean, even before the pandemic, you'd hardly be in a meeting where there wasn't at least somebody who was dialed in over video. But the intangible parts of the creative process break down very quickly when you're not in front of each other. So we've had to build up new working habits around that. But sort of through that, I mean, I think that last creative example I showed around the way that we were able to shoot a TV spot despite not being able to run a normal production. I think there's a scrappiness to the way that have been thinking about the creative process and the production process, and also just the sort of outside of the box thinking in terms of, there's so much uncertainty around the way that our work can sort of hit the airwaves at this point that we need to think very creatively about how we produce the work that we do and which insights drive it. And my hope is that we can continue sort of thinking of things that far outside of the box and being a bit more ingenious about it, even as we sort of return to normalcy sometime in the future.
Okay. Last question, maybe a bit out of left field. Everyone, of course, is saying that the human attention span is getting shorter and shorter with all these digital distractions. Have you found in your data anything to support that? Are people's listening habits changing over time?
In terms of attention span, I feel like, I mean, maybe our data scientists would kill me for saying it, but I feel like audio is a bit exempt from that trend. Of course, as Snapchat, Instagram stories, as the obvious other sort of digital platforms that have risen up in popularity over the past few years support the idea that people have only the capacity to process things for a short period of time. But we have record listening and podcasts on the platform, and that is not a short form format for the most part. So people are listening more than they ever have. And, so it'll be interesting to see if there's any long-term repercussions from it. But so far as I can tell, audio doesn't seem to follow that same trend.
They're still listening to whole songs. We are still listening to whole songs.
Listening to whole songs, whole albums, whole podcasts, the whole bit.
Okay, fantastic. Zach, thank you very much for your presentation and the questions. And hopefully in the future, maybe you get to come to Amsterdam in person.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.